Hi, everybody. I just thought I would make a video talking about going over the review. I saw a couple posts on the web forum, and it made me realize that the review by itself is rather scary. So let me just go over a couple things that are on it to make you feel a little more comfortable with it. I think the review is a lot scarier than the test is. But so going down the list, looking at the first thing on the review, we've got what is the subfield called ethics or moral philosophy. Well, I talked about that in the first lecture, and it's also talked about in the, I believe it's Wallachau reading from Dimensions of Ethics, where he just says philosophers are going to treat these as the same thing, right? Just synonyms. Synonyms meaning something like the field of philosophy that tries figuring out what we should do or the sort of life we should live. It has some sort of component as to like how we should exercise our agency, right? Unlike metaphysics, which tries figuring out what sort of objects there are, and epistemology, which tries figuring out knowledge. Ethics is trying to deal with what sort of right action consists in, or a good life, or what the good stuff in the world is. What's important, I think, about this is to realize that, of course, moral philosophy and ethics, for philosophers anyway, are synonyms. But if the other thing is to differentiate it from something like a sociologist or a historian might do, right? A sociologist might go around the world and talk about the Japanese beliefs on ethics or the ancient Greeks, views on ethics, or the do polls on what Southern Californians think about X, right? So we're not doing any of that. We're not doing some sort of anthropology or sociological study trying to figure out what people believe about ethics. This is a class on trying to discuss what philosophers have to say about what the correct ethics is, right? And the competing theories and competing ideas about what the right thing to do would be. So ethics and moral philosophy are not a field which does inquiry into what people think about ethics, but instead tries to go directly um, and study what is the correct ethical theory, if there is one, right? If there is one, to find it. It's also not history of philosophy, right? So it's not going to be just right. So far, we've looked at a lot of history. We've looked at Kant and Aristotle. We've talked a lot about these historical philosophers and ethicists, but of course, that's not why they might originate the theory. It gets built upon and added to, in the same way that something like that happens in physics, right? You have Einsteinian physics, which clearly is not the same as relativity is not the same as it was when Einstein first put it forth. Nor was Newtonian physics the same when he put it forth, when it was finally not overcame, but replaced by relativistic physics and quantum mechanics, right? So these theories originate with these historical philosophers, but then are built upon and improved upon and hopefully made more accurate over time. So that's the first question: what is ethics and moral philosophy? So the next one I have here: what's the difference between philosophy and chemistry, and philosophy and poetry? So this goes back to, I think, my first video lecture, where I talk about how both philosophy and chemistry are trying to figure out something about the world. They're trying to discover, chemistry is trying to figure out facts about, I don't know, liquids, chemicals, elements, whereas philosophy is trying to figure out things about how we know things, how knowledge works. In ethics case, right, what we should do, what sort of ethical rules there are, what sort of things in the world are good and what sort of things are bad. How it differs from chemistry is that it doesn't use experiments, right? A philosopher can't go set the good on fire and see what its boiling point is. A chemist can do that, right? Chemistry is going to be a field of inquiry that's experimental. Philosophy, in that respect, is much more like mathematics than chemistry. It's a field that's trying to discover facts about the world, but can't use experiments to do that. What about philosophy and poetry? Well, I think poetry, the differentiation there would be something like poetry is not a field of inquiry. It's not trying to find out stuff about the world. Or literature or drama or sports or football, any of these other human activities that don't seem to be fields of human inquiry and trying to collect knowledge about the world. Okay. So the next thing on the list is normative and descriptive. So normative language, so normative sentences are statements like, you should bring 3 chairs into this room, or you should go outside, or you shouldn't kill people, or along those lines, right? They have a sort of, you need to go do this aspect to them, right? They're not just trying to describe the world. They're not purely descriptive. A descriptive statement just tries to match the world and tell you how it is. A normative statement is trying to tell you to go change the world, to go do something differently. Now, normative statements don't always have the word should in them. Um, you might have somebody say like, I have a right to life, right? A right to my life. So don't, well, what that essentially means is don't kill me. Or I have a right to my property, which essentially means you shouldn't steal my property. So sometimes it's not going to have the word should in it, but it has it sort of covertly included. The sort of normative aspect is there, but not directly stated. So you also have things like it's good to help people, right? Which is essentially saying you should help people. To give examples of some descriptive statements, the earth is round, there are 3 chairs in this room, water boils at 100 degrees, oh no, Celsius? Or Fahrenheit. I'm going to drop that one. Good, right? So there's the normative descriptive. So I could say something like there are 10 chairs in this room, or I can say that there are 3 chairs in this room, but there should be 10, right? And so the should statement is a normative one, and the descriptive one is the one that just tries matching how many chairs are actually in the room. A trickier example of the distinction would be something like I say, he believes that you shouldn't go outside, right? So I say that Jim believes that you shouldn't go outside. In that case, that's going to be descriptive because I'm not telling you to go outside. I'm not saying you should go outside. I'm saying that he believes that you should go outside. So I'm actually describing his normative beliefs. So that's going to be a descriptive statement, right? Unless it has this element of when I utter it, I'm actually telling you to do something or having some sort of implications as to how I think you should act, then it's not going to be normative. Okay. So the next thing we have is good life, good and bad stuff, right and wrong actions. So this is just the focus of the 3 different ethical theories, right? The virtue ethicist looks at the whole life and is wondering about what makes a good life. A utilitarian or a consequentialist is going to say, well, ethics is more concerned with not what makes a good life, but instead let's figure out what the good and bad stuff in the world is, right? They're sort of more like scientists and going out into the world and trying to figure out what in the world has this property of goodness. And then they think that that has implications for how we should act because they think we need to act to maximize the good stuff. But it's still about finding what's good and bad in the world. And they think that it's, of course, good is pleasure and bad is suffering. But they're not so much concerned about what makes a good life. It's more about finding what thing in the world is, what stuff in the world is good stuff. And then Kant is going to be the one who's more concerned with right and wrong actions. He's looking for some sort of rule that helps sort right and wrong actions, right? Which actions I'm duty bound to perform and which ones I'm duty bound not to perform. So he's trying to find the rule which sorts the good. And so we can think of it as the virtue ethicist is looking for the sort of person I have to be to live a good life. The consequentialist is looking for what's the good and bad stuff in the world. And the Kantian is looking for the rule which sorts out right and wrong actions. Okay. And something to notice about that is both the Kantian and the consequentialist and the utilitarian, they're all sort of focused on, in particular, actions, right? The utilitarian wants you to right now act to maximize happiness, and the Kantian wants you to right now act to follow your duty, do your duty, follow the correct moral rule. Whereas the virtue ethicist is the one that's more concerned with your whole life, right? They're almost not even giving you guidance on particular actions. They're just talking about in general what makes a good life, and so probably you should get these virtues and try to be more like the virtuous person, but there's not so much guidance on particular actions. So that's another important distinction here, is just that the virtue ethicist, unlike the other 2 theories, isn't as focused on particular actions as the other 2 are.